Oh, thank the maker. Something positive finally happened in regards to live service stuff and Sony's incessant push towards assuming that all of us actually want this stuff, assuming that we actually want, live service games up the wazoo. I'm going to get to all the details with this, but the overarching news at the minute is that Sony are apparently walking back a big part of their push into live service games. This comes from a write-up over on Xfire, initially leaked by a supposed insider over on Reset Era, whose information does actually line up with what former God of War creator David Jaffe has been saying across the last couple of weeks, and the fact that The Last of Us Factions live service multiplayer game is reportedly on ice following various layoffs of contractors who were on the project. Now, this is a long time coming. Like I said, there's a lot more to this, but I'm yet to see a single person champion the push into live service games. I'm yet to see a single person remotely excited about it. Sony showed off Fair Games. There's the weird Splatoon Foam Stars thing, Bungie's new game, the Marathon, the reboot thing, but it's more of an extraction shooter. There's all that stuff. None of them were received very well. Marathon's views on YouTube seem pretty solid, but even the leak that it was going to be an extraction shooter with assumedly all these different loot components and everything else, that didn't seem to go down very well. Most of us remember the PlayStation 4 era, one of the biggest eras in PlayStation history. Remember the amount of single-player games that came out of that, and the amount of memorable experiences and narratives that came out of that, whether that be God of War's reboot, Ghost of Tsushima, Uncharted 4, whatever, and then think that the idea of them pivoting into live service stuff was always completely anathema to why we were there in the first place, and it seems like various teams within Sony share that as well. So this comes from user Head on the Block, like I said, over on Reset Era, saying that internally there is a shakeup happening in regards to Sony recruiting more third-party devs. Sega and Bandai Namco are mentioned here to help with the games as a service push. However, I would say that if you look at the wider, bigger picture, none of this seems like it's going to pan out. The first thing to mention is the supposed firing of veteran producer Connie Booth, responsible for helping bring everything together from the original Crash Bandicoot to God of War Ragnarok, who was apparently fired behind the scenes, according to David Jaffe, that's the God of War original creator, over creating internal strife amongst developers and teams as the company attempted to shift into live service production. Jaffe reported, after speaking to two of his own sources within Sony, that various teams are currently unhappy with being asked to make live service titles, and apparently it was Connie who was blamed for not bringing everyone together for this new vision. Sony have since thanked Connie for her time, but it was very unceremonious. They confirmed that she's leaving the company. They didn't confirm the firing or anything. But even the announcement that she was leaving didn't reflect how much work that person put in. Same thing as when Amy Hennig was let go, even though she helped bring to life Uncharted and the Legacy of Kain games, some of my favorite anythings ever on this earth. But yeah, the way that everything went down with Connie Booth, if you go on her profile page on Moby Games, you can see just how many game credits she has and how she's been responsible for so much of the PlayStation identity across the last 34 years. And like I said, David Jaffe reporting this stuff and talking to his internal sources pointed to this overall shift internally at Sony towards the way that former single-player devs were now being asked to make multiplayer games. The Last of Us is one of the ones that stands out the most, The Last of Us Factions, being this assumed attempt to get Naughty Dog to make a live service game. Now, apparently this was at least put on ice. There are other reports saying that it is canned altogether, following Bungie's internal review of the game. Bungie were brought on, obviously they were acquired, developers of Halo back in the day, developers of Destiny, brought on to look at the Last of Us game, to look at the various multiplayer games that are on offer, the games as a service titles that are in motion, and assess the viability of them. And apparently The Last of Us Factions wasn't remotely up to par, which makes sense. Naughty Dog are known for making incredible multiplayer games. I don't mind Uncharted's multiplayer as much as the next person, and I enjoy the original Last of Us's multiplayer Factions mode as well, but that wasn't the selling point. That wasn't the reason we were there. That wasn't the thing you can hang an entire multiple year rollout on. And you only need to look at the likes of Halo Infinite, which has clawed back some territory now, but that game was an absolute mess for the longest time since launching in 2020. So overall, as much as this report is saying that, according to internally at Sony, they're trying to rely more on third-party devs, I'm adding to here that I very much don't think the overall push that Jim Ryan laid out is actually going to play out. Now, back in 2022, we had Jim Ryan say that he wants to have up to, I think it was including 12 live service games running by March 2026. That's the fiscal year as it ends in 2026. The idea being that the future of Sony was all live service stuff. That's where Foam Stars came from and Fair Games. There's reports that Helldivers 2 was going to be more of a live service as well. But overall, it seemed like the future of Sony, at least for, as far as Jim Ryan being head of PlayStation, that's the direction they're going to go in. However, I mentioned all the Connie Booth stuff, and I mentioned everything that's happening with this report on the internal strife within the studios, because Jim Ryan himself is also stepping down. The head of PlayStation is also stepping down next year. Now, he cites that he wants to retire. He's been traveling too much. He's sick of going back and forth between London, America, and Japan, which is assumedly fair enough. That would be very exhausting. But at the same time, it just doesn't feel like this is going to pan out, considering the wider reputation that live service games have. I did bring up a whole list, and there's far more than this of the amount of live service games that have died in just the last 3 to 4 years, if not just this year. Those include Anthem, The Avengers, Evil Dead, Chocobo GP, Babylon's Fall, Splitgate, Hyperscape, Knockout City, Rumbleverse. The list goes on. Almost every single attempt at a live service game has failed. And it's one of those things that reminds me of the way that Overwatch dominated so much in 2016 that not a single other hero shooter could get any purchase whatsoever. That Battleborn was another live service game that just couldn't get out the blocks whatsoever. And it's just one of those things where you look at the overarching attempt to pivot into live service, regardless of where the speciality of the team is beforehand. And one of the other examples that I can bring in here is Rocksteady. Look at the state of Suicide Squad. Look at how much that game has been walked back and then rejigged. It was about to come out, and then it was walked back because the announcement was, actually, no, we want to, rethink what this game's going to be and put it back out next year in 2024, and hope that it can recoup some sales, because it's not, assumedly, going to be as predatory a live service as was initially assumed from everything that they showed so far. Now, I think that baton of hate has gone to Mortal Kombat 1 right now. That game's overpriced £12, whatever the hell it is, fatality is insulting and ridiculous, to be honest. And it's a slippery slope, but I've always maintained that Mortal Kombat is one of the only positively received Warner Brothers anythings right now. And it feels like WB are just doubling down on the love that's there for MK, spreading out that game's content over assumedly the next few years to try and recoup as much funds as possible. However, I mentioned Rocksteady and the Suicide Squad project because Rocksteady's own creators, their own founders, Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker, they left Rocksteady in October last year. It mirrored what happened with Rockstar, where Dan Houser, Laszlo Jones, and Leslie Benzies, key instrumental figures in the identity of Rockstar over the years, and key instrumental figures in making sure that the likes of Red Dead Redemption 2 can even exist, also left Rockstar. And as much as they cite wanting to do other projects, obviously that's what they're going to say in the public eye, the ground underneath them has notably changed. The way that GTA is perceived now is almost entirely related to GTA Online. It's almost entirely related to the live service stuff, shark cards, the content drops every few months. It's not big, meaningful, memorable single-player experiences anymore. And I think they wanted to get a GTFO as much as Sefton Hill and Jamie Walker did for Rocksteady as well. Lord only knows what state Suicide Squad's going to launch in next year, but I think it's very much endemic of the overall push and failed sustainability of live service games. Like I said, you only need to look at the pile of bodies that are left in the wake of the amount of titles that have failed to know that this is not it. This is not the way that the industry is going to go. And myself and Josh Brown, shout out to JB, I've covered this many, many times over the last few months across the year itself, as many third-party devs and devs overall, or publishers overall, have steered into this model only for it to fail over and over and over again. As I play through Alan Wake 2, as another little thing to throw in here, I noticed that even Remedy are mentioning doing a live service game going forward. They had to help out on the Crossfire game to secure some funding to help bring various titles that they wanted to do together anyway. But I fear for that. Remedy are not known as a multiplayer dev, and it seems like they're the next studio to try, they're another veteran story-based studio to try this stuff and likely fail. I mean, I love Remedy, I adore Sam Lake. Alan Wake 2 might be game of the year, but I'll be amazed if they can bring that stuff together. Overall, though, like I said, the latest talking point is just coming from the X-Fire write-up and the leak over on Reset Era. However, and brought alongside all the various things that are happening with Last of Us contractors being fired for the Last of Us Factions multiplayer game, it just doesn't seem like this is coming together whatsoever. And as much as internally they can mention bringing third-party devs on to help whilst restructuring the first party, if there is so much internal strife here, I obviously personally would rather they get the hell away from this stuff altogether. Foam Stars and Fair Games are not going to be worth the time by the time they come out, and I'll be amazed if something like Suicide Squad proves anything wrong as well. So we'll see. Let me know what you think down in the comments below of the state of live service games, the state of Sony first party, and what you want to see from the various developers working under Sony as well. What do you want to see from Naughty Dog? What do you want to see from Insomniac? What do you want to see from these teams? And is it actually live service? How would you do it? How can you actually make a live service game work whatsoever? Or do we just need to abandon this stuff and get back to the identity that was there during the PlayStation 4 era, when we were getting so many powerful first-person stories, narratives, thematics, characters, etc., that allowed them to get here in the first place? Even saying that has reminded me that there's the Horizon live service game as well, which maybe there's enough love around Horizon to make that work, but I'll believe it when I see it. I've been Scott Taylor from WhatCulture.com. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll catch you very soon.